be live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another session of Community Office Hours with Boundary. I have the Boundary bunch here with me today. It's Brady Bunch, but with a couple letters in between. I practiced that a couple times, by the way. I kept saying brunch, which is not what you should be saying. So anyway, we're here with the Boundary bunch. Oh no. We've now changed the band name from the Jeffs and Pete to now basically a good part of the team. We're glad that they're here today. I'm your host, Rosemary Wang. I'm a developer advocate at HashiCorp. If you have questions or comments, we'd love for you to interact with us in the chat. As you do, however, please keep in mind our code of conduct in this virtual space. In general, we ask that you're welcoming, inclusive, friendly, and patient, be considerate, respectful, and professional. You can review our code of conduct at hashicorp.com/community-guidelines. We'll also drop a link to that in the chat. Now, onto our office hours. We'll start with introductions. We'll go Pete, Randall, Jeff Mitchell, Sushmita, and then Carlos. And if we get out of order, that's okay. We can popcorn instead. So we'll start with Pete.
Okay, thanks, Rosemary. My name is Pete Payson. I'm responsible for product management for Boundary and really excited to be here to chat about all that's been new for Boundary for 0.3, as well as some cool future looking items as well that you can stay tuned for.
Hi, I'm Randall Morey. I'm the front-end engineering lead on Boundary, and I'm excited to demo a new feature of admin UI.
I'm Jeff Mitchell. I'm a principal engineer on Boundary, basically just overseeing everything.
Hi, I'm Sushmita Giramala. I'm a front-end engineer on Boundary, and I'm excited to show our latest desktop client release.
Hi, I'm Carlos, front-end engineer on the Boundary team. I'm excited to show the latest work we have been doing on the Boundary clients.
So we've got a lot of content today. If you have any questions or comments, or you're excited about something, do post in the chat. We love to hear about it. So to summarize at least what we're going to show today, Pete, would you be open to communicating what's new in O.3 and O.4?
Sure, I'll try to do it quickly because, as you said, there's quite a bit to get through. So I'll try to keep this a little brief. For starters, though, have to kind of go through the quick 2-minute repitch of Boundary for those who are new and joining us for the first time. Boundary is a zero trust access solution that really deals with how to securely grant private access to critical infrastructure resources. Boundary really focuses on human to machine access and creates a secure identity-based access model for those kind of critical infrastructure resources, whether they're VMs, databases, containers, what have you. In terms of how Boundary really goes about doing this, the whole idea, and I guess our vision for Boundary's open source offering, is that it enables an identity-based access model where users can authenticate to their IDP of choice, whether that's an external identity provider like Okta, Azure Active Directory, what have you. From there, once authenticated, users have granular role-based access controls, which basically allow you to have a flexible authorization model that governs what resources you can access and then what actions you can perform against those resources. On top of that, once you kind of handle that authentication and authorization piece, a core part of Boundary's philosophy is creating a just-in-time access model to actually connect to those resources. In Boundary, that happens at the network level in terms of the actual TCP tunnels that get created from clients to the end target systems through the Boundary proxy. But then also kind of one of the core parts of our vision for Boundary since its initial release is to also handle credentials for those sessions that get created through integration with external credential management solutions like HashiCorp Vault, for example. This is kind of the vision that we've been going after since Boundary's original open source release last October. And since then, we've kind of been working away at really completing this vision. And since our last office hours, we've actually delivered a lot of different new features that we'll kind of be going through today. Some of those that you'll see, one of them being managed groups, which are basically a new feature that deal with the problem of how to keep Boundary group memberships consistent with permissions managed at the identity provider level. So if I'm a Boundary administrator, it's sometimes a real pain to have to update group memberships and role assignments at the Boundary level for every user that gets created from an external IDP. Managed groups really go about solving that problem by enabling administrators to define dynamic Boundary group membership rules based off of claims managed at that external IDP level. The second feature that we'll kind of be going through today is Boundary's Windows desktop release. So Boundary desktop is a way for low or no code users to have a GUI interface, on a native application to view what targets they can connect to and then securely connect to those targets. When Boundary desktop was first released, it was only available on Mac OS. So we're really excited about the new capabilities around offering Boundary desktop on Windows. The third thing that we'll kind of go through, and I'm not necessarily going in order with these, I'll kind of recap the order of demos after this, is just our new OIDC auth capabilities. With 0.3, we released auth capabilities for Boundary OIDC, I guess account management through our admin console, and then also in a 0.3 follow-up release, we released support through our Terraform provider. So Boundary's admin console basically gives users a way to administer OIDC auth methods and OIDC users and accounts through our admin console graphical user interface. And then Boundary's Terraform provider gives a programmatic infrastructure as code way to view those, view and configure those same auth methods programmatically. Beyond that, we've done a lot of work kind of on the nuts and bolts of Boundary in terms of improving session cleanup security. We've made improvements to the Boundary's dev workflow. And then there's one other thing that we've been working on quite a bit that's actually going to be released either later today or I think either later today or early tomorrow. I'll let Jeff comment on that specifically, but that's integration with Vault for Boundary's credential management. That's something that has not yet been available, but will be released in 0.4. We're really excited about this new feature. It basically gives users the way to have a seamless single sign-on experience to critical targets. Basically, the way that it works is that Boundary can integrate with HashiCorp Vault to serve as effectively a Vault client and check in and check out secrets or mint secrets on behalf of users, and then broker those credentials to user sessions, making them available either through the Boundary CLI or Boundary desktop interface. Jeff will go through the CLI experience and Carlos will go through the desktop experience. But I guess in terms of order of demos today, the first one will be Randy with some of the OIDC auth improvements in the admin console. We'll go to Jeff for Boundary's managed group capabilities, then Susmitha to go through the Boundary Windows desktop, back to Jeff to kind of go through Vault credential management, and then wrap up with Carlos to hit the home run out of the park with Boundary credential management through Vault and exposing those secrets in the Boundary desktop experience. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up and so that everybody can see the demos. And Randy, I'll pass to you and take it from here.
All right, thanks, Pete.
Before you start, 1 second, we have a question in the chat. And it's a product question. I understand we have session monitoring in Boundary UI. Do we have any built-in option for session recording, like typical privilege access management solution does?
Sure. So that's a good thing to disambiguate. So in the Boundary admin UI, and then also in the Boundary underlying Postgres database, we log sessions that get created through Boundary. So we basically expose session metadata that we can track based off our TCP proxying. That basically allows users to see an audit log of what users connected to what systems, when, and kind of metadata around that access. Right now, Boundary doesn't have any introspection of the actions that were performed within a session. So let's say like tracking, SSH sessions to know what commands were executed by a user against a Linux target in that case, in that example. That is something that we're interested in pursuing in the future. But I want to stay tight-lipped about that because we don't yet have a timeline for that, and that's not talked about too much publicly yet, but very much something we're kind of well aware of in our vision for Boundary, and something that we'll have more details on likely later in the year.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, Randall. Wanted to get the question in.
No problem. Thank you. All right. So let me share my screen. One of the big features we're releasing with the UI in 0.4.0 is the ability to configure OIDC auth methods. This was something we released earlier, but it was only available through the CLI. So today I'm going to walk you through creating an OIDC auth method and then logging in with it. I'm using Okta as the third-party provider. So I've gone ahead and it's going to make me sign in. Hold on a second. So I've gone ahead and I've created a developer account on Okta, and I have set up an application so that I can connect to Boundary. So this is a very simple example. I've just assigned a single user so they can demo today. And here I have Boundary running in development mode. Essentially, these are the default generated resources, but I'll show you how to create a new OIDC auth method. Just click on new OIDC. OIDC auth methods have a lot of fields. There's a bit of configuration, so we think that having the UI is really helpful because you do need to jump back and forth between the provider and Boundary when you're configuring. So let's call this Okta OIDC issuer. The name of this field is going to depend on the provider. Okta calls it the Okta domain. So I'm going to use HTTPS and paste in the issuer. Client ID, client secret. Okta provides these at the top. Just paste these in. Right. So Okta wants an RS-256 signing algorithm based on my experiments earlier. So I'm going to stick with that. There are 3 fields here that, actually 4 fields here that I'm not going to fill today because Okta doesn't need them out of the box. But if you want to go into a little more configuration with your OIDC auth methods, you can certainly get some use out of these fields. I'm going to leave them blank for now. So the API URL prefix. So this is essentially where Boundary is running. Boundary doesn't necessarily know where it's running, so you have to tell it. Could be behind a load balancer or whatnot. So we do ask that the administrator provide that. And then this callback URL is generated for you after you save your auth method. And then you would go back to your provider and paste that into a field like, in this case, it's called sign in redirect URI. I've already filled that out on the Okta side. So I'll just jump back here and make sure that my signing algorithm is correct. All right. All right, so I've got my Okta OIDC auth method. There are 2 more things that I need to do in order to use this. So I'll show you what happens if you come unauthenticated. You're not going to see the auth method up front. You have to first enable it by setting it to public. We set it to inactive by default, just so you don't actively or accidentally expose something that's in configuration. And then if you want users to be auto-created when you log in, which you probably do because the users or accounts come from the provider, you're going to want to set that auth method to primary. So I'm going to make it primary. All right, so if I go back to this screen, unauthenticated, I'm going to see the Okta OIDC auth method. And if I've done this correctly, it should pop up Okta, and then I can sign in. Right, success. And then it pops me into the admin signed in. So yeah, we're really excited about this. This was just becoming available now. It was only available through the CLI, but as you saw, there's some bouncing around between the provider and Boundary. So we think having the UI support is really important. So I believe Jeff Mitchell is next.
Sure. Do you want me to just start, or did you, Rosemary, was there anything beforehand?
No, so far nothing. Yeah, so far nothing in the chat. There is a question in the chat. We will answer it when we get to that portion. So just
Yeah,
wait for a moment.
About the vault stuff. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah. All right, Jeff,
so I'm going to demo OIDC Managed Groups. So let me share my screen here. So I'm going to go start a Boundary dev server, which we don't need to look at this screen, so it's a small font size, but the other one will be bigger. All right. So in a default in Boundary Dev, since I think since OIDC came out, then there's a default OIDC provider, which I'm just going to use for kind of ease of use. And what I'm going to show is a feature that we're calling Managed Groups. The idea behind Managed Groups is that they are using information coming from a third-party IDP. So it could be, Okta, or basically any OIDC provider that's being targeted through the OIDC auth method. And we use the information provided by them to control membership in a group. And the mechanism of that I will show you in just a moment. But once you do that, you can use this managed group in a role as a principal, just like you can a user or a normal group already. And so this is kind of a really nice way to take sort of your existing relationships and all that and make it available for gating access. So I'm going to authenticate as an admin to start out with. Okay, so this is just usually I do usually I will use history, but I just didn't this time. Okay, so I'm just logged in as an admin, so I can kind of show you around. So we have, as I said, there's a default auth method, and there are some the same admin and user accounts that are available in password are also part of the dev OIDC auth method as well. So that's what we're going to use. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a managed group. And so it's going to be great. So OIDC type. And I'm just going to hit enter, and you'll see it's going to say, okay, you have to, not what I meant to show you. OIDC, do the boundary slide. And it's going to say you need to provide a filter. So what this filter is when you get a JOT that comes from your OIDC provider, it's just JSON. And when you make a user info call to the OIDC provider to get more information, that's also JSON. And in the same way that we have various types of filtering, such as like on list responses and worker tags that basically act on JSON information within Boundary already, we're using that same filtering language and syntax to allow you to filter within the JSON that comes from either the token or from user info. And so I'm going to create a filter. I'll just start it with I'm going to say if the token's JSON data and the subclaim equals foobar. So that's the filter. So obviously, if you're doing it for individual subjects, it's generally not going to be useful. You'd usually use something like, a role in a kind of a list of roles, or you might use a matching expression to say, like, if they, if it matches some subdomain, email subdomain or something like that, then that would be what you would do. But this is just very simple. So I'm not actually going to match this when I log in, but I want to log in to show you kind of what it is I'm going to try to do. So authenticate OIDC and OIDC. Yeah. When the boundary slide fails, yeah. All right. Oh, that's why I can. Cool. So I just have a browser open and I'm just putting in user and password to get the unprivileged user. So let's say that I want to list that I want to be able to like list roles and read roles in the default dev project. So right now I can't do that. So let's say, you know, boundary list roles roles list scope ID, and I'll give it the project scope ID. Okay, I have no permission. So my current unprivileged user right now has no permission to do this. So I'm going to, and it really helps if I knew how to type. Okay, so I'm going back to my admin user. So I created that managed group. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to create a role within the project. I'm going to, so let's see, boundary roles, add principals. So I'm going to take this role ID that I just created. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the managed group that I created before, and I'm going to add that as a principal on the role. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, I guess, change it up here too. I'm going to do an add grants. And I'll say, okay, so grant ID equals star. Oh, sorry, yeah, ID equals star. Type equals role. Actions equal list, comma read. Okay, so I now have a role that has this managed group that I created as a principal and grants the ability on any role within the scope to list and read. So now I'm going to log in again as my, so the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to update my filter. So this I'm going to say the subject is user, because that's the unprivileged user. And I'm going to log in one more time. Okay. And now if I go back and list roles, it doesn't work. Why isn't that working? That's odd. I'm doing something small and stupid because this did work before. But I'll tell you what. Why don't we move on? I will figure out what I did wrong and I will fix it, and then we'll come back to me. But this is generally how it works. Somewhere along the line I just missed something, so I apologize for that. I have to go back and look at my notes. That's the problem with trying to do a live demo. Is you're like, all right, I've got the whole script, and then you're like, I'm going to do it live so that we show you, and then you forget something along the way. So I will stop share, but I promise I'm not going to do anything to the setup other than figuring out what I got wrong, and I will come back to it and fix it and show you the rest.
Good. Live debugging. Very excellent. Okay, so there is another question in the chat, which is, are there any plans on supporting an HTTPS target via Boundary?
I can't say anything about that.
All right. So based on the nodding, all right, maybe there is something for the question asker in the chat. There might be something. Okay. All right. So while Jeff debugs, Shashmita, do you want to show the Windows desktop client?
Happy to. Let me share my screen and we can get started. Everything looking good or everything readable?
Yes, but if you could bump up your volume just a little bit, just
sure.
in case. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm super excited to do a demo of the Windows desktop client. So in our last release for Boundary desktop client, we added support for Windows platform. So I'm going to do a quick run through the application. What can you do in this version? And to get started, essentially I'm going to need a Boundary controller up and running. So I'm just going to go to this really useful download page and get the CLI and get the desktop client and download them to my desktop. So I've already done that, and I'm going to launch the Boundary controller using Boundary dev mode because it brings with it so much awesomeness that just, you have to use it. It's so powerful and so easy to get everything you need up and running quickly and then go through the rest of the workflow. So I'm going to do a quick version check because paranoid. And I'm going to launch the Windows CLI binary into dev mode, which is going to set up my scopes, my accounts, my auth, and all of those awesomeness. There you go. A couple of things of note in here. It automatically creates users for us. So I'm just going to make a note of the user. I'm also going to make note of where the controller is available to me. I'm going to do that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is actually launch the desktop client, which is available. Once you extract the downloaded folder, you'll have an EXE to launch, and I have it up and running here. So this is the brilliant desktop client on the Windows platform. The first thing we're going to be doing is letting the client know where exactly the Boundary controller is hosted. So the address that I have through the dev command, I'm going to enter that in, and now it's going to communicate with the controller and go figure out what are all the scopes that are available to me, and then also let me know what are the authentication methods available to me. Since we've been looking at OIDC previously, I'm going to go do the OIDC authentication, which is so powerful. So just click on the button. It's going to launch a new browser window for me to give me a test login that I could use, and I'm going to use the credentials that were available to me. Oops, that hasn't happened before, so let's try this again. Must have fat fingered this. There you go. So that's successful. Just going to close the browser guy. And now that I'm back on the desktop client, you can see that it got automatically redirected after a successful op. And what it's showing me is basically all the targets that are available to me, and also all of my sessions. Since I don't have anything in here, it's just going to say no sessions available. But it's also going to allow me to do the deauthentication and also the ever powerful changing of our color theme. I'm going to go back to light, and I can also go into a target, see if a specific target has any active sessions or any host, and I can see that this specific target has one single host to it. And now I'm going to connect to it so that it can create a local proxy for me to connect to that specific resource. And it's as simple as just clicking on the connect button. And it's going to show me the information for proxy using, the IP address and also the port. What I'm going to do with this information right now is just copy it. I'm going to pop up PuTTY, and bear with me while I do the copy pasting into the relevant feed. There you go. And I'm going to start a session, and then it's going to ask me for certificate auth, and I'm going to log in to my own box, and there you go, I'm in. So that's super powerful and super easy to do. And if I go back to the app, I can also see that my sessions are being reflected here. It's showing that I've successfully connected and I actually have an active session. And in case once I do my work and I'm done with it, I can just click on cancel, which is going to let the controller know, hey, the worker is done with this. Let's just close it off. And let me go back to PuTTY to see what it says. It says, hey, connection got aborted. You no longer have access to it. So I can agree to that. And it doesn't allow me to type into this nice little window. So I'm done. And to get back into this workflow, all I have to do is go back, look at my targets, click on the connect button again. And all of this on our ever-loving Windows platform.
I think all the Windows users are clapping right now.
I'm happy to hear.
Now, my question is, do you have a desktop client for M1 Mac?
We are working on it. It's not everybody has an M1 Mac on the team to work on. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah, it's been funny. So a couple of folks have been reaching out to me saying like, things don't work on M1 Mac. Everybody, we're working on it. Be patient. But I think the Windows users are really excited about this. Okay. For the sake of time, I don't think there are any new questions in the chat. There was a question about a boundary Helm chart, and I reposted for visibility, but just to review, thank you to Jeff Melnick, who was on chat today. So we do have the Pete and the Jeffs. Well, we only have one Jeff on camera right now, but the Helm chart is, it's an early version, but nothing ready yet. So hopefully something will be available. And I see folks are very excited about Windows. Big Windows mood is the current comment. So very exciting. Okay. All right. Let's see what's next. I know we're moving along. Jeff Mitchell. I know we're talking about Vault integration, but did you end up getting the OIDC managed groups working?
I think I just figured out what the problem was, and it was, as I stated, stupid. But if you could give me about another minute to test it, then I'd be happy to go on, and thank you.
Excellent. Okay, filling time. What I'm best at. So I guess for those who have already demoed Randall, Sushmita, Pete, like what? So in terms of we've seen OIDC, a lot of folks were really excited about the workflow in general for OIDC. And I know on a previous office hours, we were doing the OIDC CLI. So, and I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, in a previous office hours, we also talked about OIDC configured through the Terraform provider. Is that correct or incorrect? I think Jim might have mentioned that.
Yeah, so that's something that was released in I can't remember the specific like 0.3.x release, or excuse me, 0.2.x release. But that's something that we added support for within our Terraform provider. So you can basically, add an OIDC auth method, accounts and groups and users through the Terraform provider. One change that we did make as part of that, just so for folks that have used that, so that we can initiate the full configuration with one apply step, is just having our OIDC callback URIs follow a predictable schema, so that you can add those in ahead of time without having to, first configure an apply, or like configure an auth method on the IDP provider side, configure your template, and then go back and reapply with the update with the new URI. So that's one thing that's kind of simplified the workflow, so that the full configuration can be done in a single step. But
awesome.
Seems like Jeff's all good, so I would pass back to him. Yeah, Jeff, are you going to talk about the managed groups, the Vault?
Yeah, I'm just going to finish that up.
Ones.
I'll finish that up, and then I'll. So what I did, I said it'd be something stupid. What I did is when I was going through and I meant to update the filter for the managed group, I accidentally created a new managed group instead of updating the filter for the old one, and so then the managed group that I created initially was the one that I added to the role to give grants. So it all makes sense if you understand it, except that basically I just was working on two different things. One managed group got added to the role. The other managed group had the right filter because I had meant to update the first one, and I hit create because I just wasn't, you're in the middle of a demo and you make a mistake. You have a create instead of an update, and that's it. So I will just show that. So I'm back as the admin. I'll just show method ID. Okay, so you can see there's two managed groups. So I'll just show. So you can see now the filter is correct, and you can actually see that the user account has been added as a member ID of the group. This gets updated every single time that you authenticate. So if you authenticate and you no longer match a filter, you will be removed from those managed groups. If you're an admin and you want to force people to change over the groups, you can simply delete their tokens, revoke their tokens, and then they'd have to log in again, and that would update their group memberships. So now I'll prove that it works. So I'm authenticating as a user again. You can see the user ID is the unprivileged user, and I can do it. So apologies for that. It really was just the create versus update. So I was working with two different things, but yeah, so it's really nice. You can use this metadata that comes in from the JOT or that comes in from user info, and basically run kind of arbitrary arbitrary Boolean queries on it in that filter syntax and slice and dice groups. So it's a really nice way to kind of set up a group that will match a bunch of your users without them having to log in first and establish that. So I think I'm up also for the next thing. Or did we get through all the other demos, or should I go on to Vault? Okay, I should go on to the Vault stuff.
Here we go. This is the big question. I think we've gotten in every office hours this question, which is, when will Boundary integrate with Vault and how?
So I'm going to kill my Boundary dev session. I'm going to start. This is kind of a test that we have that just starts a bunch of Docker containers for me. I thought about just making like a whole Docker compose file. It's like, we already have this. I'm not going to do that. So what this is going to do, this is just going to set up a Boundary controller and worker. It's going to set up a Postgres container and a Vault container. It's going to initialize Vault with a Postgres, basically with all of this stuff to connect to and to connect to the Postgres container and issue credentials against it. So this is just going to give me a lot of setup, and then I'll show you what it all kind of looks like on the user side. The setup would be extremely boring otherwise. Just a moment. Setting up the containers.
This is when I need soundtrack music.
There we go. Okay. I just need to grab this address of the started controller. And by the way, this is going into Terraform. There will be learn guides about this. So this is me taking shortcuts for the purposes of timing. Okay. Okay. So I've logged in, and basically I'm going to show you what the credential store and stuff looks like, and then I'll show you what happens when you're connecting to it. So we have this new thing called credential store. So credential stores, I'm going to list, do it recursively, and credential stores, do a read. Okay, so this is a Vault type credential store, and you can see it has the address, and it was given a token. It has an HMAC. This is useful for things like Terraform to be able to allow the provider to tell whether or not the token has changed from what you have set. So, Terraform can understand if something has changed. So there's an HMAC that comes back the token. The token is required to be orphan and periodic. And so it's something that the Boundary controllers will keep that token refreshed as long as any Boundary controller is running. And so it will kind of keep that token alive during the lifetime of kind of Boundary. So that's our credential store. And I'm going to show the credential library. So there's a single credential library, also of type Vault. And there's a subtype, which we haven't shown here because we really only have one sort of subtype, which is generic. So this is what's known as a generic credential library. And it's called generic because when you create it, what you do is you supply, let me show you what this looks like, and I'll tell you what else you can supply. Show libraries, read. Okay. So you can supply the HTTP method and the path. And there are other fields. So for instance, if this was a post, you could supply a request body. So you would give us the serialized JSON, and we would give that request body to Vault. And so you can say, okay, this is against this role, these are the parameters that I want to use to generate credentials when someone uses this credential library. And then that becomes what gets passed to Vault. So we call it generic because this one is designed to not be the easiest thing that you could possibly get to use with like defined fields, but it also will work for any sort of credential store. So it kind of parallels how we tackle TCP type targets first, because that will work with almost anything, and then we'll have kind of more specific types of targets later on. So anyway, so there's a Vault credential library, and you can see it's got there's a database secret store, and there's a database role called opened, and so this is just it's getting creds for that. So I'm going to show what it looks like in a couple of different forms. So if I do a targets authorized session, so the target, I should probably show the target as well. Let me do a read. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. So you can see we now have application credential libraries. You can see the credential store ID, and then the ID of the library itself. It's called application credential libraries because there are other purposes for which we can see generating credentials in the future. So this is sort of us preparing for that eventuality without having to change things in the API later on. So the target has this application credential library. And you can see if I do an authorized session, then we get back authorization token, and we now are getting credentials. So the credential store ID, the library type, and then this is the JSON that came back from Vault. Now, if you were to put that into JSON format, then you'll see that because the item, when you do this, matches the JSON that comes back from Boundary, you'll see that it's actually base64 encoded. And the reason it's base64 encoded is it could be JSON, but it could be XML if that's what a future credential store supports, or it could be some kind of just a plain string or something. And so this gives us a way to take whatever that underlying data might be and make it safe to transmit across the JSON API. But even in that case, what we now do is at the top level, we have this decoded credentials block where we will put that decoded block. If we know that it's a vault, we know that it's going to be a JSON object, and so we can decode that for you. Now, when you do Boundary Connect, it's a similar sort of story. Boundary Connect, target ID. So with Boundary Connect, you now are seeing the secret information, the credential information there as well. And even if you do it in format JSON. And one difference here, you can see under credentials, we've actually decoded this. The reason is this isn't a real response. Boundary Connect under the hood does an authorized session call, and then this is just a response that we're generating for kind of the user. And so if you are getting JSON output here, we decode it for you because it's not trying to keep parity with the API. So we can take this and we can pop that into PSQL. We actually can go one step further. So starting with the Postgres subhelper, or kind of helper for Boundary Connect. And we will be eventually plumbing this out to further types and introducing other types as well to make this easier. But starting with Postgres, so now if you do the same thing. So if I do Boundary Connect Postgres, and this will have an issue, but I'll explain why in a minute. If I do Boundary Connect Postgres, then what's happening is it's actually getting those credentials and it's saying, hey, I see username and password. That's a type that I can make use of to connect to a database, and so I'm going to attempt to do so. Now, one thing that happens when you are using PSQL and you're supplying this, it expects to have a DB name because the authentication is against a particular database, and so that's why I said it was going to throw a warning. It says credentials are being brokered, but no DB name provided, so it may misinterpret that parameter's database name. But I did that so that you could see the fact that it's getting past this on the command line. And so now I just have this handy DB name flag to Boundary Connect Postgres. And of course, and I'm connected. And of course, because this is Boundary Connect Postgres is just a shorthand for doing like an exec and passing a bunch of stuff. I could also do DB name, Postgres to pass it as a Postgres flag to the PSQL thing. So that's actually getting those credentials from Vault, and it's passing it straight through into PSQL automatically for you. Now, one thing that's important, and this sort of goes back to that question that was asked in the chat about, could you just use this for access to AWS? One thing that's important is that, just like if someone has access to a resource directly and they aren't required to go through Boundary, then, if they can directly access that resource, then they can directly access that resource. And so if they have their own credentials, let's say I just have my own username and password, if I can go around Boundary and get to some kind of internal service, then I can use my new username and password. And so, we always say that one of the best practices is to take the stop my share. We say that, best practice is to set up your firewall such that, if you have kind of a public facing sort of service that isn't on a private network where Boundary is granting access into that private network to specific endpoints, that you should firewall off those resources to only the Boundary workers. And that applies here too. If I was getting those credentials brokered from Vault, and I were to say, okay, I have a username and password, and now if I can just get directly to Postgres, I can use that username and password. That is true. You could do that. And so it is still important, just as it is before credential brokering, to ensure that access to the database is only allowed either through Boundary or or it's just some subnet or something that is otherwise inaccessible to the user. So getting those broker credentials doesn't change anything. One of the really nice things, though, is that those broker credentials, they don't require the user to have a Vault login or to interact with Vault. And when the session is finished, not only will Boundary keep those credentials renewed, but when the session is finished, Boundary will actually go and revoke those credentials on Vault for you. So it'll scope the lifetime of those credentials to the lifetime of the session. As for that AWS question, if people are able to get to the AWS console, then you're not really going to come out ahead because that's kind of a global endpoint. So unless you're firewalling off access to the AWS console from within your whatever network you have, then it doesn't really help there, unfortunately.
Awesome. So I know we have one demo left, which is Carlos's, but we do have a question in the chat asking about one-time SSH password. So would SSH OTP also be possible via Vault and Boundary, just like SSHing into the target VM without keying the credentials?
Yeah, it should be. I mean, the difference, I haven't tried it because there's the Vault, if you're using Vault OTP, then there's that helper that you install on a remote system. I haven't tried it out with that, but it can ferry across any credential, and so it will just display that value for you. And so if you SSH in, or if you then take that value and use it with I forget if you can use the Vault SSH command and provide that value directly instead of it going to Vault, getting a value, and then SSHing for you. But yeah, as long as you can SSH normally and then provide that OTP, then you should be able to get that brokered back to you as well, because you are defining the path and the method, and then optionally the request body that goes to Vault.
And one, I think, general comment just about the kind of overlay support and how the syntactic sugar that we do on that front to wrap the application layer call into the Boundary connect statement. As Jeff pointed out, right now we support Postgres as kind of the first pass of passing those credentials in. We'll add support for our other subcommand overlays in the future. So this is the first of many on the credential brokering side.
Awesome. All right, Carlos, I believe we're still on Vault integration, Vault credential management. So I believe you have the desktop client available as well.
Yes, I am going to present, following up with the explanation of Jeff relating credentials. I'm going to explain that from the, oops, it just disconnected. That was not expected. I'm just going to follow up on what he just explained on the terminal, but how is showed on the desktop client. One sec. So I'm connecting to the Boundary instance I have running, which is already connected with Vault. And we have a list of targets, in this case, just one target.
Carlos, real fast, I might be wrong on this, in which case I really apologize. Are you sharing your screen?
Okay, no.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
So now you guys can see my screen.
Excellent.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Sorry. So this is the client, the desktop client. And as you guys can see, there is a list of targets. In this case, there is just one because this is set up for just one. We can connect to the target. And once we are connected to the target, we can see right here exactly what Jeff was explaining about the credentials. We retrieve those credentials from the target from Vault, and we can get here the certificate we use, expiration, private key, etc., etc. First of all, we can see the ID of that credential, the type, which is Vault. Jeff explained that before. And for now, because we care about security, we just can copy those values. You cannot see them. You can copy it and as a demonstration, you can copy the certificate and paste it here, and the certificate is on your clipboard, which is pretty handy. And also you can see the raw API output. We need to work more on this, but it's pretty good so far. So yeah, that's the desktop client part of the credential store management.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a question in chat about, I believe we're trying to get YouTube chat answer, but we have a question about kubectl. So does Boundary currently support kubectl to interact with Kubernetes clusters, or kubectl, or kubecontrol, whatever people call it these days?
Yeah, I can take this. So we do have a helper for Boundary Connect, which is Boundary Connect Kube. And one thing I'll say, why not kubectl? Because the helpers are, just like it's not PSQL, it's Postgres. The helpers are designed to have different styles that they can support, which are basically different kind of clients we can interact with. So Boundary Connect SSH can support SSH on the command line, but also supports launching PuTTY, for instance, if you're on like Windows. So so there's Boundary Connect Kube, and that does have what that can do basically if you set it up with a target. It can so it can basically launch kubectl, passing it the correct overriding server name. So when you're doing, so the normal problem you would have if you're trying to make a connection to a Kubernetes cluster, and you're going through Boundary, which opens local proxies, is that you would say like, all right, I'm trying to connect to the kubectl, and it's seeing 127.0.0.1, but it's a TLS connection, and it expects to see kube.mycompany.com on the certificate, and it doesn't expect to see 127.0.0.1. And one way you can get around that is you could reissue your certificates, which nobody really wants to do. But the other way is that kubectl actually supports overriding the expected TLS server name and changing what is sent. And so essentially what the helper does there is it will invoke kubectl for you, but it'll pass in the expected host and port. So basically it'll pass in the right address so that when kube actually connects, then the TLS, you don't get a TLS error, and it sort of refuses to do anything, just refuses to do anything, period. So it's one of those things that it's only really passing in like one flag, but it's like an important flag that makes it easier to work with. And that's why we have these helpers, right? These helpers are just to make it easier to use Boundary Connect with different types of protocols. And obviously once we get other types of protocols generally, then they will have kind of more deep integration with those. But for now, they provide a lot of kind of syntactic sugar to make your life easier. But nothing that you couldn't do with like, Boundary Connect and then passing in --exec and execing kubectl and then passing in the arguments you want to it with the appropriate host and port. We're just taking care of these common sort of concerns because otherwise they can just be a little tough to figure out.
Perfect. Okay. So I posted the documentation for the CLI wrappers in the chat. So for those who are more interested in kind of some of the documentation as well as what Jeff and the team are referencing, there is a link in the chat for it. So some folks briefly asked about, where's the documentation for for Vault credentials management? Any references that you can point them to when this feature is available? I think, sorry, I'm taking a look. I think someone mentioned there's a Learn tutorial, right?
Yeah, there's a Learn. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Pete.
I really apologize. I was getting pinged by something on Slack, but I think that the question was about documentation for Learn guides available for Vault credential management. That's something that we'll have available in the coming, let's say 24 hours. We've the team's hard at work with what's released right now, both in our doc site as well as in a Learn tutorial, and we'll be sure to include that link.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat for session monitoring. We do have an excellent UI in Boundary Client. Any plans to bring in a dashboard integration with Boundary UI, which might help in triggering alerts of suspicious activities?
So Right now, within the admin UI, there's a couple plans that we've talked about to improve monitoring of sessions as well as the underlying Boundary infrastructure. Those aren't anything that we yet have a committed timeline for. However, one thing that we do have users doing is that all Boundary session logs are available in the underlying Boundary Postgres database and can be connected to via a BI or SIM tool of choice, at which point in that external tool, you can configure alerting should you so choose, and should your SIM or BI tools support integration with Boundary Postgres. That's something that we actually demoed last October in our initial HashiConf session, was an integration with Microsoft Power BI, which I know Power BI doesn't necessarily support alerting, but other BI and SIM tools certainly do. So that's kind of the workaround that I would have for right now, and then is certainly something that we're thinking about adding within the product itself.
Thanks, Pete. I think we're trying to dig up the link to the demo. If it's not posted, if we can't post it in the chat before the top of the hour, I'll certainly add it to the notes and the description at the bottom of the video as well. Thanks for all the great questions for those who are coming in. And big thanks to the Boundary team for this amazing set of demos. I think this is the most demos we managed to get in an hour ever on any community office hours, which is truly impressive. And most of them were, all of them worked, which is great.
Yeah, sorry for fat fingering that one at the beginning, but happens.
It's fine. It was great. I think there's a lot of excitement from everybody who's in the chat and those who are tuning in. For those who have tuned in and asked questions and participated, we really appreciate your feedback. Any additional questions, you're welcome to post on discuss.hashicorp.com. And that's our community forum. We'll be able to follow up as well for any information. I think we're going to close out this office hours. For those who are interested in learning more, we have some of the other office hours for some of the other tools. We may have one for Terraform this Friday. And so definitely tune into that. HashiConf Global registration is also open. HashiConf Global will be virtual and it's live from October 19th to 22nd. You can sign up at hashiconf.com/global. And if there are any questions, concerns, or otherwise, you're always welcome to tune in to another office hours for Boundary. We try to do them every month or every couple months. So keep an eye out on the office hours page. So following up on links, we did find the video of Pete talking about the BI SIEM integration at HashiConf. All right, I'm going to post that in the chat as well. And for those who want to follow up on any other community office hours, I will also post that into the chat. Boundary team, any last words, anything that, from a community standpoint, you would ask the community to help with?
Nothing else really. One kind of cool update that we didn't even get to, that is a neat addition to our reference architectures repo. Our reference architectures repo is a really nice way to kind of get started with deploying Boundary on your platform of choice. We've got examples on AWS, Azure, GCP, Kubernetes, and Docker. We actually also just added a reference architecture for integration between Docker Compose deployed Boundary with console Terraform sync to drive Boundary target configurations from CTS. So that's something that was actually demoed most recently by a friend of ours, Charles Zaffary at Roblox, and he put together a demo for that and added it to our repo. So thank you to Charles for that. And that CTS integration is definitely cool for the community to ingest Boundary targets from a console catalog. That's something that we do plan to support in even like more seamless fashion. But that's something that people can already get started with through CTS and Boundary's existing Terraform provider. So one last kind of like shameless plug for an honorable mention. We didn't have time for that demo, but something that could be cool for the community to go and kick the tires on.
Awesome. Thank you all. And with that, we're going to close out the Boundary bunch. I said it right this time. And I appreciate for all of the team that's on this call today and for those who've tuned in. And we'll see you at the next office hours.